today with me, I have James. James is a serial entrepreneur. He is doing so much things, even introduction can be like 15 minutes, but I'll keep it short. He's founder and CEO at podcast.co, matchmaker.fm, qpodcast.com, and a lot more. So I'll hear it from James. James, maybe you want to share your backstory, what you do, so people can know and learn more about you.
All right. Yeah. So I describe myself as an audio entrepreneur. Like all of my businesses really focus in on audio. And my backstory is I started out when I was really young. I was 16 and I was looking to go into radio as a DJ. And I sort of started, but I was also interested in building websites and like learning how to code and that kind of thing. So I kind of saw a gap in the market. This is like 15 years ago now, long time ago. And I wanted to, I sort of learn how to put radio stations on the internet. So I still am involved in that market. We have a company called radio.co, which is like a platform which runs about 5,000 radio stations operate using our software now. And yeah, that was kind of how I got into audio. And podcasts is sort of something that's more recent. Podcasts are not a new medium. They were probably around back then when I first sort of launched, my business, but we kind of noticed an opportunity like 2018, they started really taking off. So we thought, well, let's get into that market as well. Let's get into the podcasting market as well as the radio space. And interestingly, like both businesses are still doing really well. There's equally as much demand for radio as podcasts. In fact, I think sometimes there's quite a lot more demand for radio sometimes because a lot of people like that kind of live element to it. But I think, audio is a great tool for brands to communicate with their customers, whether it's either live or if it's pre-recorded, just because it's very personal. You have people's attention and, more and more people are consuming audio on the go via smartphones. Obviously, that's not kind of a new thing now, but we've seen obviously a huge uptake on it versus sort of when I first started. But more recently, over the past few years, people listening on smart speakers and things like that, or embedded into their cars, smart TVs, all that sort of thing. So, audio's, despite the fact, a long time ago, people said video killed the radio star. I know that's kind of cliche and everyone says it, but it never did, and I think audio is as important as ever, and it's a really good tool to communicate with your audience.
Absolutely. I'm sure in your entrepreneurial journey, when you decided to pursue being into music industry, how did you maybe you want to share some of the challenges that you found in the industry and you wanted to solve that? Maybe you want to shed some light there.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the challenges that we've always tried to solve whenever we build products is taking a complex problem and making it really simple and accessible to anyone. So when we launched radio.co, the idea of building a radio station was very costly. You needed lots of equipment. You needed all of this sort of, servers, racks of equipment, mixing desks, big fancy studios. And we thought, how can we build this into a cloud-based system that's easy to use and can be completely controlled from the browser? With podcast.co, again, we were wanting to build a platform that was kind of slicker and easier to use than a lot of the other platforms out there. I think they've certainly got a lot better, but certainly 5 years ago, a lot of the podcasting platforms were kind of pretty dated, like they were kind of not very friendly. The UIs weren't great. And again, with Matchmaker, more recently, we identified that there was this issue where a lot of podcasts were based just like this one on having guests on board, and being able to communicate with interesting people is kind of crucial to build your show. And sometimes a lot of people start out and they'll be interviewing, say, perhaps they're kind of their sort of immediate circle of contacts. It might be like some friends, or it might be business colleagues or partners that they have. But then, of course, once you've kind of burned through that initial sort of list of people, it's like, okay, who do I go out and interview? So we wanted to create a solution that was enable people to connect and basically gave a kind of an easy way to go out and find guests for your show. Or if you want to get featured on other people's podcasts, it, of course, allows you to do that as well, which is great if you're an entrepreneur or someone trying to grow their personal brand.
One of the favorite products that you have is Matchmaker.
Yeah.
I've been using that as well. And I must say, when I was starting my podcasting journey, so part of building a personal brand is like, reaching out to other podcasters, influencers who
Yes.
will create a press release for you, or kind of like you being interviewed, right? So although like, you have following on LinkedIn or any other social media, you need to build that trust among your audience that you are being like interviewed on several different podcasts or other news channels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Matchmaker definitely helped. I think I got almost 15 to 20 leads from that specific platform.
That's great. Yeah.
So really solving the problem and connecting the dots here.
Yeah.
Is there any idea behind, like, I'm sure you came across such problems, or yourself finding the right podcast to be interviewed on, or finding a guest for your podcast as well. So how did you come up with this platform, this marketplace?
So Matchmaker came about by accident, really, because we had our existing we had podcast.co, our podcast platform, and our podcast business, and we were looking at ways that we could market that product to different audiences, and we were sort of discussing it internally, and we thought, well, a lot of people who are guests on podcasts end up starting their own show, so why don't we kind of Matchmaker basically started life as 2 Google forms, right? So it was like, one was, hey, tell us about yourself. If you're looking to get featured on podcasts, what sort of shows do you want to be on? Tell us a bit about your story or your expertise, and we'll connect you with them. And the other one was saying, if you've got a show and you're looking for really good quality guests, tell us about your show, what sort of guests that you're looking to get on board, or if there's any particular topics that you want to cover, let us know. Mm-hmm. But we didn't actually have any way of connecting these 2 groups of people together. So it was really just like a marketing funnel that we designed. And we thought, well, why don't we have all this data? And before we knew it, we had a couple of hundred responses on these Google forms. Mm-hmm. It was like classic, what you call like an MVP, minimum viable product. We hadn't spent any money, and we just put these 2 Google forms on our site. We driven, put some traffic towards them, written a couple of blog posts, that sort of thing. And when we, a few months later, we realized, wow, we've got a few hundred responses. And these weren't just like, give us your name and email address. These people were, effectively like creating profiles about themselves. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like a good opportunity to then, well, let's build a product here. Let's actually figure out how we can connect podcasters with guests. And that's really how the idea for Matchmaker came around. And as I say, it was kind of by accident almost.
It's been a long journey for you in this industry.
Yeah.
And how do you consider to be like, what is the key success factors that you think that are that has given you success?
I think that's a good question. So I think one of the main drivers for my success has been being persistent. Like when I was young, starting out for many years, it was me on my own. I was doing everything. I was writing code, talking to clients, and what they call nowadays is like hustle. But really back then I was like trying to juggle everything. Mm-hmm. As soon as I started hiring staff, and we've got about 50 people who work with me now, which is great. Yeah. So and again, it's kind of insane. Like I can't believe that I'm really lucky to have such a great team around me now. But to start off with, I was like, wow, I'm doing so much. I was working till like 11 p.m. at night, and I was at university, kind of trying to balance that with my degree. So when I graduated, I thought, well, I need to hire people, because otherwise I'm going to just literally go insane, because I couldn't really go on vacation without thinking about work. And it was just like almost like a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week job, as it is with a lot of people when they first start, right? But then when I started delegating, I noticed pretty quickly I managed to start growing the business in terms of like revenue, in terms of the number of customers that we're serving, mm-hmm. everything else that comes along with that. So I think that's been kind of one of the key drivers for me. Is been really good at delegating, and also just persisting, like not giving up. Sometimes you have an idea, it doesn't always work out. Sometimes success doesn't come overnight as well. You've got to work at it for a long time before you kind of consider yourself successful. But then again, what defines success? I think it varies. It depends on.
I would say success is like, how many lives you're impacting with your idea, man.
Yeah. Yeah, but then also you want to, everyone has financial targets they might want to reach. You might have targets of how many yeah, you could dead right. You could say how many lives you're impacting with your products, but also how, providing employment for people, which is really, really good. And, when you have suddenly start growing your team and you have like a lot of staff working for you, and you're thinking, wow, what we're working on together is providing not a livelihood for me, but also a livelihood for all these people, so, but then again, I think when you hit certain milestones, you then try and achieve the next one. So you kind of, the vision of what success is always kind of sliding, I think what success was for me 10 years ago when I was sort of starting out was very different to what it is now.
I think one of the key factors also includes your niche that you selected, right? Mm-hmm. And then you expanded horizontally, vertically in each direction, and like went all in that specific niche. Mm-hmm. And that played an important role because building an audience in that specific niche requires time, and you did that very, very well. I think one of the key success factors can be that as well.
Yeah, I think it requires time, and also a timing of a product. So, for example, with Matchmaker, we launched that just at the start of 2020, and it was not planned, but it obviously coincided with when lockdown started happening because of COVID. Mm-hmm. And the timing of that was right because everyone was looking to start doing. A lot of people were starting podcasts, and they were sat at home. They couldn't leave their house or their apartment because they were literally required to stay at home. And as a result, they were like, well, what am I going to do? I've got this extra time in my hands. I'm not socializing. I'm going to start a podcast, or I'm going to start being on podcasts. So I kind of, I think timing for us there was bang on because, there's a few competitors now. At the time, there wasn't really any other platforms doing exactly that. There was maybe like one or two. Now I think there's probably like 6 or 7. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we got in at the right time. The product market fit was right. And I think that can sometimes have an impact on success too.
Excellent. So what I was asking is, let's say, for example, this journey that you've been into, right, podcasting, and you've been into this industry for almost a decade, right? What do you think like next 5 years would look like, the future of podcasting?
I think podcasts, I hope they're not going to change too much. I think the cool thing about podcasts versus when you look at something like TikTok or YouTube mm-hmm. is they're sort of platform agnostic. They're not controlled by one giant corporation, like YouTube mm-hmm. and obviously Google. And for a long time, that was the dominant force in video. Now it's sort of shifting to TikTok. I think Spotify is trying to make efforts to try and absorb as much of the podcasting market as they can. Obviously, mm-hmm. Apple for many, many years were the big dominant force. And if you want to listen to podcasts, you go on iTunes or you go on Apple Music, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that Apple equally sort of neglected it. They didn't really innovate in the space. They didn't change. And as a result, then Spotify came in, swooped up and have sort of taken a big market share, which I think is quite interesting. So it'd be interesting to see what happens, how that continues panning out, because again, I think, Apple are certainly aware of the fact that this has kind of happened and they're probably trying to claw some of that back now. But again, I think it's good that, we're not, as podcasters, we're not restricted to sort of one platform. And, when you listen to a lot of the big YouTubers, some of them will say, oh, well, I'm annoyed with YouTube because they won't allow this video or they won't allow this content or, this video has not been monetized. These silly little things that kind of crop up and will cause people issues. Well, as podcasters, you don't really have that. But then equally, I still think it's quite hard to grow a business out of a podcast. Some people do it really well. Other people try and just sort of don't, and I think what we focus on as a business now is working with brands and creating podcasts and live audio experiences, which I think is kind of easily justifiable because you can use them as an extension of your existing marketing strategy versus mm-hmm. relying on that solely to be, a source of income or a business on itself.
Great. What advice you would give someone who is looking to launch a product? Because you've been creating 3, 4, 5 different products, right? And I'm sure you have a lot of experience making it successful, right? Somebody who is an aspiring entrepreneur, what tips you might give them to have a successful product?
I think you need a clear idea of the market that it's going to solve and the problem that it's going to solve. Don't just create a product for the sake of it, and have a clear idea of, I one of the things that I found really valuable, I don't write code now. I haven't probably written code for 10 years. But the fact that I learned a bit of PHP and HTML stuff when I was at university, not to an advanced level. Like the guys who work for me, the programmers and development team who work for us, they're, hands down and miles better than I any time I was. But what it did give me is a good grasp of how things work under the hood, if that makes sense. So I think advice for entrepreneur, figure out, like, just start. You can build products a lot easier than back then as well. There's all these like no code platforms and stuff. Just try and get your head stuck into it, kind of get an understanding of how a product actually works. If you're building a web platform, particularly, what are the moving parts? What sort of infrastructure would you need to run that? And I think that has been really beneficial to me and has allowed us to run quite efficient development teams and build very good quality products. And whilst kind of keeping costs, not having, because you hear about these startups that get like millions and millions of funding, and sometimes their products never see the light of day, or they might launch them and then 2 years later they run out of money. We've sort of been quite lean in our approach. Most of my companies have been bootstrapped, and the ones that haven't, we've never really had external investment. It's been more based on like debt financing and things. So I think, that's because I've always been had my sort of finger on the pulse in terms of when it comes to product development, and thinking about it, how are we going to do this efficiently versus just splurging a load of money up the wall.
Wow. So there is a lot of, challenges when it comes to building a product, but the bigger challenges is like finding like first 100 customers for your business, or first one. And I remember what you said initially, that you were doing a lot on your own in initial days. Yeah. So how do you define like sales strategy initially when you're looking for that first 100 customers as a founder?
So I think like this, and again, things have changed a lot now. When I started out, there wasn't like, you couldn't go and prospect people on LinkedIn, for example, or that wasn't a thing. And likewise, email marketing wasn't as big as it is now. So I think there's lots of ways that you can go and validate ideas now. I'm a big believer as well in, if you're building a product, start a website and just start creating content for that market. Even if you haven't got anything to sell yet, just start getting that traction. So, for example, when we launched podcast.co, we were building the podcast.co platform probably for about a year before we brought it to market. So in that year that we were actually working on it behind the scenes, we started just writing articles and creating content on podcasting, and building a mailing list. So when we were ready to launch, we had those first probably more than 100 customers really ready to go. So yeah, that would be my advice: is just start trying to kind of build a mailing list, start trying to build a community, or start creating content for the market that you're trying to target before you're actually ready to launch.
Excellent. Well said, 100%. Because at the end of the day, I've been seeing a big trend in community building, specifically like bigger brands or any smaller brands even are talking about community and like targeting the niche and making sure that you are connected to your niche and like selling it, not selling it, maybe educating it, and then building that trust which is required to buy your product.
Yeah.
That brings me to the next round, which is rapid fire. It's more on the personal side of you, and there are 5 questions. Okay. You can take your time and answer them in detail. It's not something that you have to answer it fast. Okay. Name one other company and CEO that inspires you, and why.
This is always a tricky one. I'm going to go, well, I don't really follow like celebrities and stuff like that. I think in the early days, I know probably loads of people give this answer, but you've got to admire Steve Jobs and Apple. And just the way, like, for example, when he pitched that first iPhone, the way he explained that, and that was just like a masterclass in presentation and taking something that was, for a lot of people at the time, quite a foreign or complex product, and I just explaining it in a really simple way. And I thought that was just brilliant. And that was kind of massively inspirational to me, back at the time when I was, in my, would have been like early 20s. And I just started out in business,
I'm a huge fan of Steve Jobs too.
Yeah.
He's Great. He was a great marketer,
Gone
man.
too soon, gone too soon, real shame.
What's one of the best business advice you've ever received?
Hmm. Don't worry too much about what your competition are doing, because I think, and I was guilty of this in the early days, you can get too hung up on looking at your competitors' websites, constantly trying to copy them or trying to be aware of everything they're doing. I think you've got to be single-minded in your approach to what you're doing. Yeah, you've got to have some awareness of the competitive landscape, but I see this with our competitors. Like, a lot of them will just try and copy us constantly, or they'll just, we'll write an article and then they'll write the same article. It's like, you've got to just try and be single-minded in your approach, and you've got to really understand your market. Don't worry about what everyone else is doing too much.
What's one skill that has helped you become successful?
I think I go back to what I said earlier. When I learned to code, I think that was really valuable, especially in the early days. It meant I didn't have to go and spend a lot of money on development, which is expensive and very expensive now. So I think learning to code was a great skill when I first started out.
Yeah, so maybe that would be a technical skill. If I ask for any soft skill that is like, making you successful.
Okay, well, that's communication, and it's being a good talker, being able to sort of pitch and sell products.
You can see that definitely, James.
Right, thanks.
So, at the end of the day, like, we are into this roller coaster ride with building a product, selling, marketing, managing teams. It's a lot of stress. Sometimes like you are up, sometimes you're down.
Yeah.
And there should be an energy, right? That motivates you. What is that energy for you? What motivates you the most?
I think this is an interesting thing because, people like my friends, a lot of my friends don't have companies. They work in jobs and they say, oh, it's easy. You can work whenever you like and stuff. Like, yeah, well, technically you can, but then if you do that, then you don't really always move forward. So actually you have to really, especially to begin with, you've got to really put the hours in. And I think keeping motivated is just keeping that end goal in sight and just making sure you're working towards that goal always, and it's just, it's the same with any job. I think entrepreneurs who come in and say, oh, I've got the best job in the world, just like any job, you have good days, you have bad days, you have good years and bad years and good months and bad months. And it's just how you take the knocks and the falls and making sure that you can kind of brush yourself off. So like in the early days, I had a deal. I won't go into it because it's going to take too long to explain, but I'll kind of give you the top level summary. When I was probably 22, things changed for me. We struck a deal with a big company, which was AOL, which they're not as well known now, but they used to be huge. And this deal really, changed the business. It changed my life. We went from kind of being me and a couple of guys to suddenly making significantly more revenue and being able to expand the team. And as quickly as that came round, probably about a year or two later, that deal went away. And I was like completely shook. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was thinking, everything I've worked for is all going to come crumbling around me, and of course it didn't, but it meant that, revenue started to slowly decline. And I sort of spent a year trying to figure out what was next and how to kind of get out of this sort of slump that I was in. And I think mentally I was kind of just down about the whole thing as well. But of course, you pick yourself up, you brush yourself off, and then you get on. And, over that year, I think I figured out what I was going to do next and figured out the sort of the plan to move forward. So I think, there's not always a right way of doing that for everyone, but you've got to try and realize that when you sort of become an entrepreneur or you start your own business, that things aren't always going to be easy. But it's how you recover from the negative situations that's important.
I've been talking to like so many founders recently, and every time there is like almost similarity that everyone is like facing in the business. So I completely relate to what you're saying. And I think a lot of people who are listening will agree to what you said. So the next question is, and I think this is my favorite one. What movie or a book or a TV show that changed your life?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think any TV shows or movies have changed my life, but there was a book that I read, which is a lot of people have read, and it's just good advice. It's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I remember reading that.
Oh my God, that's favorite.
Yeah, I probably was about.
I think I have that here.
You got it right there. There we go. Yeah. The one I had looked different to that, but it's interestingly, what that did for me, right, was it didn't help me necessarily with my actual business that I was growing at the time. But what it has helped with is like, outside of the businesses that I run, I've got some investments in property and various other investments as well. So I think that really helped me with that sort of stuff, because they don't teach you that in school. You can't learn about property investment or how to kind of acquire assets, or I don't really like the phrase, but like build wealth. But it is quite important, especially if your business starts taking off and you start making some money and you think, okay, well, how can I invest this? You can, of course, reinvest it into your business, but what else can you invest in? And I think, part of being a good entrepreneur is having like a balanced portfolio, not always having all of your eggs in one basket. So as I say, I've got some investments in kind of stocks and shares, and I've got some investments in property. So that book was really, really helpful, kind of giving me a bit of an education on that.
Love it. So that wraps up the session. Before we end this, any note to viewers where they can reach out, and anything that you would like to say?
Well, if anyone's got anything, they've got any questions, they're thinking about starting a podcast or anything like that, or thinking about sort of doing anything to do with the audio, feel free to drop me a message. The best way of getting in touch with me is via LinkedIn, and my contact details or social media handles are all on my website, jamesm.com.
Thank you so much, James, for joining us today. Everyone who's listening, we hope you gain insight into how our guest James has been able to create successful product that is changing the way we do business in specifically podcasting industry. So we wish you all the best, James, for your future growth. Until next time, this is Pratik signing off.